Yay.
You're good to go, Mayor.
Thank you very much. I'll wait for Councilor Burrow to get online. There he is. Okay, good evening. It's been a long time since we got together, almost 24 hours. I'd like to call the meeting to order and start with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the
Pledge
flag
allegiance to the flag
of
of the United States of America,
and to the republic for
Republic
which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty,
liberty,
and justice for all.
justice for all.
Okay, so our goal tonight, last night was the public hearing session. Our goal tonight was to try to digest any of the public comments yesterday and decide if we wanted to make any changes at all to the local law 1-2021. And just as I'm just trying to go through procedures with everybody, if there is any changes or substantial, we have to redo a public hearing. If there isn't, we move forward and it will be on the February 3rd agenda. One other thing I want to talk about was last night there was a comment about a referendum. And I just wanted to clarify some things. You know, we're trying to get some legal advice on what that means. So Madej, Maris, and Ricky took a look at the independent legal research reviewed by Gibson Dunn memo, which was provided to us this week. We will provide that to everybody on council so you guys can see what Gibson Dunn has said. And they listened to the presentation from Council 82. City Council is now faced with a decision to adopt local law 1-2021, either as a written or subject to the results of the mandatory referendum. There is insufficient case law to definitively, wow, that was a tough word, state whether a mandatory referendum is required. However, it is the opinion of Madej, Maris, and Ricky that the city would be in a strong position to argue that a referendum is not required. Accordingly, council may adopt local law 1-2021 without a mandatory referendum pursuant to municipal home rule law section 23. Really what that kind of means is there's a couple ways to go. If we decided we wanted a mandatory referendum, we would have to vote on that and it would be challenged. And then we would have to go through the procedure of being challenged, especially if we expended any funds, it would be Article 78. If we decided not to do a mandatory referendum, which seems to be the legal advice at this time, we could be exposed to litigation that would go through a court system and possibly drive a mandatory referendum. So that's just to give you, the two paths that would be out there. Council is telling us they do not recommend that we drive a mandatory referendum at this time. So I just wanted to kind of clear that up based on a comment that was brought up last night. So the floor is open. Councilor Pruitt, go ahead. I see your hand almost raising.
I didn't want to cut you off. I thought you were done, Mayor.
Nope, I was going to move on to any issues.
Well, actually, I think along those lines, I know that it's taken 7 or 8 months, and I keep thinking of that expression most of us have heard, that making a law is like making sausage. And boy, hasn't it been, a little bit of everybody's input, not only in council and city management, but outside. And so I can't imagine that it could have been molded any better than where it is right now. I doubt anybody on the Zoom would sit down and write the same contract the way it stands right now. Everybody's got a different opinion, and anybody who's going to read it's probably going to have something they'd like to change in it. But we've come up with the best we can of the best we agreed before. Also, out of the 112 people or so last night, I was listening intently, but I didn't hear anybody say any change specifically that they would like to see to make it better. I heard that, most of the negatives were basically they'd like to see it abolished in its entirety, but not really that they could mold it or change it or do something to improve it. So no specific changes. So that being the case, I'd like to have a shorter meeting than usual, put forward a motion for local law 1-2021 that we approve it as it currently stands and that we move it toward a final vote on February 3rd.
Okay. Councilor Cameron, I see your hand up.
Not that I'm okay if the meeting goes longer, but I second that motion. I'd like to, I think that for those reasons that John mentioned, we have a lot of people that have had their hands in this pie. We've listened to lots of people for and against. We've had residents that have dived into the details. And we certainly, I think, deserve some credit for diving into the details and navigating the initial sort of free-for-all we had with two competing documents where things got pretty confusing. But we had some great help from people and from community experts, as well as the Dunn and Gibson people. And I think we can't make a perfect law. And I think that what we can do is we can look back on it 3 months, 6 months, a year from now, and get a little bit of experience. And if we see something we want to change, we can do the same.
And Council Pruitt, I would echo a lot of your comments. I heard totally for, totally against. My notes from last night, the only thing that I heard were specific, and I wouldn't even know how to go about handling any of this, was police or family members on the board was one specific one that was called out, and that was 15.3C. The other one was the lack of mandate for training, which is 15.6A through M. And the other one was anonymous complaints, 15.7.2. Those are the only three specific items that I heard called out last night. And, you know, I sit here scratching my head saying, geez, I wouldn't know who was on the prevailing side, who was on the non-prevailing side, how you would go about making any changes this late in the game. And unless there was some compelling force on the majority of the councilors here to make any changes there, I'm scratching my head to even know how we will go about doing that. I see Councilor Peeler, then Councilor Salamandra, then back to Councilor Camera.
Just to respond to the process that I believe is in play that you referenced, Mr. Mayor, is the driving force would be if any of the public feedback had any impact on the councilors who were on the prevailing side of those issues. So it would require a councilor on the prevailing side of those issues to reintroduce something to amend those specific sections to drive an amendment, because councilors on the dissenting side wouldn't be able to bring that up.
Correct.
And that's the only vehicle or mechanism that we have or that the law or process has to discuss that. So that's it.
Yeah, that is true. My comment was I wouldn't know who is on the prevailing or non-prevailing side without going back and looking at the records. Councilor Salamandra.
I just wanted to thank you for the update on the referendum. I found that very helpful. And so I appreciate you giving that at the start of the meeting. And I agree with Councilors Camera and Pruitt that all of these things have been discussed, and because the majority of the votes were either pass it or don't pass it, I don't think we have much to change, and I agree that this should be scheduled for a February 3rd vote.
Yep. It's already on the agenda. Councilor Camera, before I go to you, I want to get Councilor Gallinese to get a first round, if you don't mind.
No.
Councilor Gallinese.
I just would like, could you repeat, you said what were those three, 15-3 and
15-3C, which is the makeup of the board where we're not allowing anybody, police or family. 15.6, and there's A through M, which are the training, which is suggested, not mandatory, and 15-7.2 for anonymous complaints.
thank you.
Okay, Councilor Camera.
Somebody called out my bringing in my grand jury experience and thought that was, I don't know, erroneous information or anything, but I think it was, I wasn't making it up. So just want you to know that, you know, from the legal side of things, what I learned was that the grand jury was formed by, it's literally specified in the Constitution, so it goes way, way, way back. It doesn't specify that the grand jurors have to be trained a specific way, and things like that. It does not want overqualified or specialists on the grand jury, because what it wants is an everyman's point of view
Or woman's,
of, what's that?
or woman's.
Or woman's, pardon my John Q. Public, which sounds masculine, but it's to reflect on what are the charges and to decide whether they're reasonable or not. That's it. And that's what we're doing here. I think we're doing something similar to that. So I offered that experience. Yes, I'm for this motion and for this resolution. I think it's going to be a great thing for our police department and for our residents and for, the whole city. But that information that I came by, I tripped over. I didn't seek it, but I thought it was, it was apropos and it was relevant to what we were doing and how you constitute the board.
Any other comments from counselors or from staff? Council Regan?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in to echo my agreement on this. I feel like most of what people wanted to tell us last night was whether, to urge us to vote one way or another. And without specifics to change that really, that certain points get brought up occasionally, but as noted, we have really covered those pretty well. And I think they want us to know how they want us to vote. That word came across. I'm sure we'll be hearing from people again and different people as time goes on before the vote. But we're at that point where it's time to vote. And I would heartily agree to move it forward to that point officially.
Council Pruitt?
I just wanted to say on the 3 points that you brought forward, Mayor, so for the audience, that it's not that we're discounting those points, but those are things that we've spent hours and hours going over already. And unless there's something fresh and we've already been through, I think those very same points. So we could bring them back up again on the prevailing side, but it's the same discussion we've had on some of those things 3 or 4 times, and confidentiality, but that had to be 4 or 5 meetings alone. So I'm not sure really that another discussion on that's going to change much. So we're not discounting what the 3 pieces of input that we did get. It's just that there's not much that can be done to improve it with that input, I would say.
Council Cameron?
Yeah, and just let's let experience. I mean, if we have a board and it's made up of 9 people and they are all of, reasonable people, they're going to maybe make suggestions after a year to council as to how we can improve it. And so I think that's going to be the best advice we can get, is some people that have actually lived it for a little while. And I think that we can't, as much as we want to, we can't imagine what it's going to be like. We're going to have to let some people take that experience and that responsibility on. And what we just have to do is find people of good faith that are going to be sincere about what they do.
Okay. Looks like we're in good shape. Just a heads up. Oh, Councilor Peeler?
Was actually hustling here on NICOM's website and on our rules of order. I think since all resolutions have been made and passed in previous sessions, since the law that we're talking about now is one piece of legislation that hasn't been voted on yet or passed or has been presented in a meeting, I believe all amendments that are made don't have to come from dissenting or assenting parties, because it's not a law that we've actually voted on. It's still in flux, and it's still, everything is on the table essentially. So, and I'm looking into that, and I just want to bring that up for consideration, or if run it through your recollection, especially Steve and Ken, who have been on council for a long time. And I want to say that is accurate, and it doesn't require a dissenting or assenting party to recommend any amendment on this current bill. And if it gets shot down, it gets shot down. But I believe every council meeting that we have resets the process for an amendment because the law hasn't been enacted.
Well, according to our rules of order procedure, when we place a vote, and you mentioned some specific words like resolution, we've been working on the local law. And this local law is what we have been amending. And when we place votes on a local law or a resolution, if you're not on the prevailing side, according to our rules of order procedure, you have to wait 1 year before you can bring that back up again.
But that isn't for all, discussion votes based on verbiage of a law. That's based on a resolution that's passed.
I'm not sure what you're getting at, but what we're talking, you talk about discussion voting. We were voting.
Well, we were not voting on anything that was a part of a resolution,
We're voting on things that were part of a local law.
part of a local law that hasn't been enacted yet. I'm just wondering, because I'm trying to find where our rules of order apply to this scenario specifically. And I just want to make sure that we have it right and we're not stifling actuality versus a technical limitation that might not exist.
Well, I'll let you study that, because if you want
Yeah,
to make
well, I'm
amendments to the
hustling.
local law, you can
I'm
make
hustling
them,
for it.
you can make them on February 3rd. My comment was going to be that you will see on the agenda, local law 1-2021 will be on the February 3rd agenda. And I've also taken a request. So we're going to do a trial, one-time trial. I'm going to put council reports towards the beginning of the meeting, okay? Just to give you a little heads up. We'll see how it goes.
Well, that's kind of my, hold on. And that's my point. There's no prevailing side. The law hasn't been enacted yet. So how do you identify a prevailing side for a law that doesn't exist yet?
You placed a vote, and there was a majority of people that voted or didn't vote.
So it's the prevailing side of the vote, not of the actual piece of legislation?
You're getting into semantics.
Is there
At
an
this point.
amendment? Is someone trying to make one?
Not that I
Okay.
know of. We're trying to understand rules of procedure.
Okay, well, maybe the attorney, that could be a question for
Yep.
Emil and he could get back to us. But if there isn't an amendment to be made, maybe we could call this vote.
Well, we're not even calling a vote at this point. I mean, we're not voting on anything right now. The only thing we would vote on right now is a motion to adjourn.
No, wait a minute. Aren't we voting on?
I thought John made
We-
some kind of
We
resolution
made
to
a
adopt as
motion.
is.
Aren't we voting to put it on the agenda for February 3rd?
It already is.
Oh, it already is.
Unless we changed it significantly and
Okay.
drive another public hearing, it is on the agenda.
Okay, I make a motion to adjourn then.
Is there a second?
Can,
Councilor Cameron?
I just have a question.
Sure.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Can we talk about anything else before we adjourn? This is just a really quick question.
Yes.
Okay, so we don't have the February agenda yet?
Nope.
So-
It's getting finalized.
All right, so what's the status of the land sale that we have actually sent out to bid with 1 point? And when is that coming to close? What's the status on that? Are we waiting?
Sage, your audio isn't working?
Not
Still not? You're unmuted, but there you go.
Adam, maybe I ask you, but you're talking about the 1 mile point that you've already approved for sale and want an update, and I can always put that in my updates tomorrow unless Adam has it off the top of his.
No, so it hasn't been approved for sale yet. There was a survey that had to be done, and Neil had been in touch with Dan McGowan, and they had agreed on an April closing, although we are going to try to do it sooner. We were going to do sooner, and Dan had requested just any time before May, and suggested April, so we'd have time to get everything done. So we will bring it before City Council for council to approve or reject, but that will be most likely in March.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Cameron?
There's just one thing. I think that one of the things that happened yesterday, which I thought was disappointing, was again, some of the people that expressed their opinions, against the police review board, also are still lacking the information about what's going on with what went on with our two trainees, why they were dismissed and everything else. And they've attributed all that to, the council. We're bad kitties and we don't like police and all that stuff. And I think at some point we have to get that information out to the public. I really don't know how to address some of this stuff where they say, there are no problems with our police department. We have a complaint process. It exists already. And they go on with a lot of this stuff. And the thing is that I would like them to be able to have some of the information I have. And because it's always well, you're just bringing, even one of our people that was, what's his face, David Ricky. He said, I think you're bringing a national problem and you're bringing it into this small community where it doesn't apply. Well, it does apply. It has nothing to do with that. There's no mega, strategy here. We have our own problems here. We're a reflection of the rest of the country. We have some police officers who were retired, and when we saw their records, it was like they had a complaint every year of their employment here. I mean, so it isn't like we as a council came up with this in a vacuum. And we had a lot of residents that wanted us to address this. And we have myself personally, I am concerned about this, this social justice stuff. And I think it applies here as well as anywhere else. So when are we going to have a report from management to the public that provides the basic details of why these two trainees, couldn't be hired anyway? And we need to, because in a sense, if we can't be transparent about this at some point, then we're not practicing the transparency that we're expecting the PRB to provide, which was one of the things that everybody wanted about police accountability in the first place, is transparency. So when can we have that information and have it released to the public?
Well, I think we walk a fine line. You're talking about a personnel issue, number one, but you're also talking about council decisions. And I think you got to be careful because people have a lot of information, whether they accept it and how they interpret it, and will it modify their thought process on either side. I think that's going to be an age-old challenge that you can do forever and maybe never succeed at.
The only thing we're responsible for is giving them what is correct information. We can't be responsible for how they interpret it or everything else. But I think right now they don't have the real story.
Can I just add a point to that?
Sure.
That's kind of almost separate. I mean, it's not separate. It's all part of the issue. Obviously, personnel issues we can't discuss, and there's good reason for that. I think it's important that people know we weren't the ones. We got rid of 2 positions, but we did not eliminate 2 actual people. They eliminated themselves. I think people need to know that. And one of the arguments that keeps coming back to us is that we paid for their training. And then, so as though obviously we have no concern about budget there because then we fired them and got rid of them. Well, if they had been released due to budgetary reasons and they were released with proper training under their belt, I think we would all feel a little better. If they were really like police officers that could carry on, we would have had them go regretfully but with some training that will help them, give them a leg up in a next job. Well, because of the way they ended up leaving their positions here, they may not have another job in police. Who knows? But I think, to have that argument coming back at us over and over again when, it's really not a valid argument. And I do think people would have a clearer understanding of some of the issues and the reasons we want this kind of a board, if they understand, as you know, these things happen in every police department, including ours, and you know, we've had to let people go, you know, for those reasons without even getting into details. But I do think it's important people understand a little bit more what's really happening with their police department.
Counselor Galanese and Counselor Salamandra.
I feel as though on this issue, when it comes to personnel, we keep speculating of, you know, why they were let go. And, you know, some of us can shake our heads, whatever. But I would like to hear Mike Pasalakwa's side of the story. I'd like to hear what he has to say. And I don't think that that is something that we can't ask for, because I do believe as council, we can ask for personnel issues when it comes to stuff like this. We do have that power, and I would like to exercise that power. I'd like to hear what he has to say about those two positions.
Section 3.13 of the city charter. You're right, Frank.
I totally disagree with, it seems like some of us want to backpedal when it was voted on to eliminate those two police officers by council. And it seems like all of a sudden now you don't want to have the credit for that. You want to push it off onto somebody else and blame them.
I think what they're asking for is clarification. And we'll get to, I'm going to ask staff for clarification in a minute, but I'd like to go to Counselor Solomon. Are you done, Counselor Galanese?
I'm asking if we could have Chief Pasalakwa brief us so we can hear his side of the story.
I think we hear that. Counselor Salamandra?
I would just like to echo what Councilor Camera and Reagan said. I too would like to have this information be made public. And also Councilor Galanese, I too would like the opportunity to ask Mike Pasalakwa why some things happened. So I'm just with it all.
Yep. Yeah. And City Manager, can you let us know, can you provide a statement somehow or whatever's within the legal limits of personnel matters so that the council knows and we can let the public know as much as possible?
And can I just quickly just say, you know, a lot of times I've faced this a lot when I've had issues, when I've tried to share information about the police. We hear from people who support the police who haven't had those experiences about what will prove it. But a lot of times there is this wall up of protection, either through personnel or through protecting a vulnerable person who is exposed. And so there are instances we must believe our neighbors, and that's why the public comments were so important, where people were sharing that they'd had experiences, and that's why the movement that the people started this past spring and summer was so important, so we could hear about some of the issues, and that's what we're trying to address.
Councilor Galanese? You're muted, Councilor Galanese.
Sorry about that. Piggybacking off of what I just stated, I would like to just clarify that when it comes to personnel, that would be an executive session. But I would hope so, correct?
Yep. Okay, City Manager, you have direction on that?
Well, I had my hand up before Frank.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
I have to say I'm uncomfortable with this being live conversation because I think it should be an executive session. But also, you know, my family came from the South, and there's an expression, they say, the more you stir and you know what, the more it stinks. And that's sort of what we're doing here. I think we've already taken our lumps as a council. And I think if people don't like our decisions or what we do on budgetary matters, we got to buck her up. You know, that's just take your lumps. And I think really, you know, forcing people to make statements, I just don't feel comfortable with that. Now, maybe others do. And obviously some of you feel strongly about this. I say it ought to be a vote, at least on council, if we're going to take council action on something of this sort. So I'd like to ask just, you know, a thumbs up, or like they were doing at the Gandhi thing in the middle or whatever. Do you want to really move forward with something substantial here, or let a sleeping dog lie?
So I appreciate that, Councilor Pruitt.
Public, you just did.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Councilor Pruitt. And I think what I'm asking of staff is to provide what can be provided publicly. And if we want to go deeper, yes, we do have a section in our rules for enacting investigatory powers, but that does take a majority vote. So I agree with you.
It's
So if we
important,
want to go,
we have more important things to do as a council, you know.
if we want to go deeper than what can be provided, we'll have to take a vote on it.
I'm for a public statement, something that's permissible in.
Well, I'd like to have my name not attached to that public statement.
Okay,
If you put individual members of council, don't drag me into something I don't feel comfortable with. I think really stand by your decisions, and don't worry about people, you know, talking about you in public. Now, if you're trying to make a bigger issue of it, raise the issue, not ask somebody else to put a public statement together. Raise the issue yourself.
John, I don't think anyone doesn't want to stand by their vote. I stand by my vote to eliminate those 2 officers. I think the important thing here is that we're being told that these were wonderful officers or officers. And what we are here to say is that there is,
That's a separate.
why should the police be protected for when something does happen? The cat never gets out of the bag when it's them. And so we have to constantly come up against it. And so we are trying to tell the truth and be transparent about what's happening in the city.
we're.
Wait, hold up. Point of order. I've got Counselor Peeler who politely raised his hand, and Counselor New. So I'd like to get those 2 guys in.
Gotcha, Laura.
And then Counselor Burrow. And then the city manager. Why don't we let the city manager go first, and
Yes.
then I'm going to go to Counselor
Thank
Peeler.
you. Yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah, I'm fine with that. Let Sage have it.
I've gotten the direction I need to seek some legal counsel on this, as you all know. And I know that, you know, being able to share what, you know, as much as possible is important to many of you. But it's just the conversations, the way that they're vague, anyone can interpret them in many different ways of what you're speaking. And that just makes me want to be able to refer back and then provide, you know, the public what we're able to say. If you want to have more in, you know, conversation or investigation of that, it does, you know, as a council group, you have that power to do that as a whole and request that as a majority. And so I would love to just stop the conversation here. I've gotten the direction and be able to come back with what is possible.
Okay, Counselor Peeler, Counselor Noon, Counselor Burrow, Counselor Cameron, even though the city manager just asked us to stop.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about what you guys were just talking about. So just for our next meeting, if anyone would like to open up a discussion about rules of order, so to quantify, and this is not semantics, it's rules. Rules are often semantics because they're based on language. So to have a prevailing side means there was something on the table that was voted yes for.
Correct.
And our current law, much of it's been presented en masse, and then amendments were made. So if a counselor wants to make an amendment to a section, and that amendment hasn't been specifically made before, absolutely on the table, because there is no dissenting side or prevailing side to something that hasn't existed yet. So I just want to bring that up. So if we want to touch on, 15.3 or 15.7, whichever of the other cases were, there is, and those specifics of those amendments haven't been made yet. They're absolutely viable. And I just wanted to bring that up so that any counselor who has any type of input or amendment they'd like to make especially based on the public feedback. One of the more prevailing reasons to even bring up a reconsideration is that new information has come to light. And that's one of the most popular sources to do something, to reconsider something. So I just wanted to bring that up, and if anyone wants to kind of open the floor to that, or there is a lively debate about rules of order, I'd like to hear anyone who wants to kind of riff on that topic.
Well,
Please, point of order. There's hands, and I'm Counselor Noon, Counselor Burrow, Counselor Cameron, and then Counselor Pruitt.
I'm good, thanks.
Counselor Burrow?
I just wanted to go back to what we were talking about before Counselor Peeler chimed in, but I am involved in hiring and firing, and I agree with some of the comments that were made by some other counselors here. And it's not so much that the public needs to know the reasons that employees are no longer in the city's employ, but it's important for the public to know that they are no longer in our employ, and it was prior to 12/31. So and again, I'm kind of with Sage on this, you know, to ask the chief of police, we're in a public meeting right now, by the way. So to ask the chief of police to come into an executive session to give us the reasons for a termination, for someone that was terminated, I don't even think that that's legal, because we are also the public, and you know, we don't have to know the reasons. So but I do think that it would be important for the public to know that the two probationary officers, as of a certain date, were no longer employed by the city of Geneva. In whether someone has the right to legally say the reasons for that, that's up to council to figure out in the press release. So I'm just not sure that you want to have a supervisor in a position to come to an executive session and give us reasons when legally I'm really not sure that he can do that, or she. So, but I do agree with Reagan and Camera and Salamandra that it's probably important for the public to know that the probationary officers are no longer in our employ, and it was not effective 12/31/20. And then, yeah, so that's what I have to say on that.
Councilor Camera, Councilor Pruitt.
Well, I am not looking for all the drama behind these departures, all the, you know, the minutia and everything else, as far as a public statement by staff to the public. The fact is that we're, though, fiduciaries, okay, and we have to spend the residents' money, okay, and this screening or hiring process that identified these two probationary officers failed. So whatever the hell's going on over there in terms of selecting officers and reviewing them and doing background checks and ad infinitum, it didn't work. Okay, and so, you know, 2 strikes so far here. Yes, there have been lots of successes, but these 2 didn't work. And the city needs to say, you know, I think it's kind of subtle, Tom. You know, they weren't employed until the 12/31. Well, you know, they were let go earlier because one had complaints against them and they were found to be valid. You don't have to get into anything else. And the other one was not able to pass the training regimen successfully. Now that happens in the military and all the time and everything else. So why don't we just say these 2 officers washed themselves out of being candidates, and the city invested in their training.
Councilor, just as a point of order, our city manager asked us to kind of stop the discussion until she can have a legal conversation. So I would like to.
I don't think I'm violating. All we're doing.
Mark, and please, Councilor Camera, please just pause.
Okay.
The position you put the city in is, I would just appreciate it if you didn't, and you allowed me to get the legal counsel on first, please.
Councilor Pruitt.
Just had 2 things, then get back to Bill on the second point. But, you know, no matter what is announced, it's not going to exonerate council for their decision, because any detractors are going to say, well, the council had already alleviated the budget for those decisions.
That's not the point.
Anyway. And consequently, you know, maybe this was just a tactic to be able to move them on since it was in a probationary thing. You're not going to win anything. So I think it's a Pyrrhic victory at most.
That's not what I'm
back to the
trying
point
for.
that Bill was talking about, which is our purpose for being here tonight. And that is that if somebody has an amendment that they want to make, that's what we're supposed to be talking about, to see if there are any amendments. And if they're not, then we move to a vote on the 3rd to finalize this law. So are there any amendments? Is somebody bringing something forward that we're supposed to be discussing versus these human resource matters?
And we already have a motion and a second on the floor, so we really can't entertain an amendment unless we negated our motion and our second
Well,
to leave this meeting. So,
I submitted the motion. I'd like to have had a vote on it, and that was to move forward to the final vote on.
but it's already there. We don't even have to vote on that, John. It's already on the agenda.
It's
for
there if
February.
we don't have any amendments. And so maybe I
Correct.
should restate it, that we move forward without amendments to be able to do the vote on the 3rd.
So wait, if we're gonna do that, we have a motion to adjourn in a second. And I still got counselors raising their hands, so we're in the discussion mode. So
Well, I started discussion tonight with a motion.
I agree with you. I'm not denying that at all. But the motion was to put it on the agenda. It's already on the agenda. It didn't need to be voted on. Now, to vote on it
I
would,
said to put it on the agenda for a final vote into law.
yeah, and it is.
Okay, then that
Yep.
means no amendments tonight. And so Bill's point is sort of
So,
moot.
yeah, we're on the way out here. And if
Yeah,
there's,
motion to adjourn.
no, there's already been a motion and a second. If there's anything.
And that was mine. I'm trying to get back to it.
I'm ready to call the vote on that unless somebody has something important they want to put on the table.
I have something important to put on the table. No, I just want to
Please,
clarify.
please be cautious though.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Bill's thing now.
Okay, thank you.
I agree we should not be getting so deep into personnel issues. But going to Counselor Peeler's point, I mean, I do think it'd be better, only this council can make a simple meeting go on and on. But
Mhm.
if we know, I mean, are we saying that that we're going to be seeing amendments brought up on February 3rd? I mean, that was the point of this meeting. And I feel it's only fair to all of us that we have them out on the table tonight, not push it down the road to February 3rd. I mean, that was the point of this meeting.
That's,
Legally, we can, so. Counselor Galanese, and then we're calling the vote.
I just want to clarify one thing. My purpose of asking for the personnel thing was just to prove the point that that Police Chief Passalak was doing his
Please
job.
be careful.
That's it. That's all I'm saying. I can say what
All
I
right.
want to say.
Clerk, I'm going to ask you to call the roll instead of doing it by acclamation.
Counselor Salamandra,
Aye.
Counselor Pruitt,
aye.
Counselor Noon,
Aye.
Counselor Galanese.
Aye.
Counselor Burrow,
Aye.
Counselor Peeler,
Aye.
Counselor Regan,
I
Counselor Camera,
Aye.
Mayor Valentino.